I don't know exactly who said it, but I was in a Discord chat and someone kind of pointed out, like, yo, the Lions wide receiver group is low key like the second worst position group on this team. And when I heard that, I was like, that's not true. Like, there's no way that could be true. Because again, my first thought is like, well, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yes, Jameson suspended, but you have Jameson, and Josh Reynolds is a solid number three. And then obviously you brought in the veteran Marvin Jones, who is not terrible, right? Like he's obviously again, he's an older veteran, but he's still been able to produce. He produced very similar to DJ Chark last year in regards to yardage and touchdowns. So my first thought was like, that's not true. But then when I realized, like, again, taking a wide lens and taking a real, wide view of the entire roster, I really started like realizing, like, yeah, there might be questions about corner as far as like how that group is going to gel and the chemistry of it. But I don't think it's one of the worst groups. It's probably a really strong group, especially if those guys all play to the caliber that we believe they will. If Cam Sutton, CJ, GJ, Emmanuel Mosley comes back, Jerry Jacobs, then you have Tracy Walker, Kirby Joseph, and Brian Branch. Like there's a good collection of cornerback and DB talent there that you're like, you know what? If that group is healthy and they're able to gel well, probably one of the stronger groups on the team. Linebacker, Linebacker again is a question mark, right? Like again, there are people who love Alex Anzalone. There are fans that don't, but you can't say that the Lions didn't upgrade that in some sense by drafting Jack Campbell and still bringing back Alex Anzalone, who they trust to man that linebacker position. So you have, at least in their viewpoint, you have two solid linebackers in Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone. The defensive end group is stacked, right? We'll dive into it a little bit later in the show as far as like if there's really top tier talent across the board, but it is stacked. You do have guys that can actually absolutely produce and get sacks and create pressure for the quarterback. So yeah, that group seems really good. You go back to the offensive side, offensive line, clearly the best group on this team. Quarterback, you feel really good about that, especially coming off the year that Jared Goff had. Running back, again, another solid group at the top with David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs that you invested in both in free agency and through the draft. You look at the tight end group. The tight end group again doesn't necessarily need a star because they did it as a group. So again that you probably feel really confident about that tight end group. But even then, you still doubled up and invested in that group by getting Sam Laporta in the second round. So again, you feel like you probably upgraded that group. The wide receiver group is the group that, again, you've added Marvin Jones and you drafted Antoine Green, but this group is still very much similar to the way they were a year ago. And so then it becomes a question of, do you think that same production is still possible, or was that more of a fluke, right? Because they were able to get by even when DJ Chark was struggling with injury, even when Josh Reynolds was kind of banged up at parts of the year, when Amon-Ra St. Brown was banged up for a part, for a game or two, they were able to get by. But then it's just a matter of, but could they be better in that group? And that's why I say I don't think they need a DeAndre Hopkins to be effective, because they've shown that they can be effective without a number one wide receiver, without this, you know, guy that you pencil in on the outside. They have a star wide receiver again in Saint in the slot, but they have proven that they don't need a star wide receiver outside. But if you had it, it's something very similar to what I said a year ago on, the previous channel I was on with the Questionable Podcast, when we were talking about TJ Hawkinson and TJ Hawkinson being traded away. While they probably didn't need a tight end of TJ's caliber, having a tight end of TJ's caliber, in my opinion, made everything easier for everybody else on the offense. That's what DeAndre Hopkins would absolutely do for you as an outside wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins has proven it over his career that he is still dynamic. He still makes some of the most spectacular catches that you'll see at the wide receiver position. And even at 31 years of age, he's still someone to be like feared and someone to be kind of like, again, accounted for. And he's somebody that's going to get your CB1's attention at all times. And then you still would have an Amon-Ra St. Brown operating out of the slot. You still have a Sam Laporta. You still have a David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs. You still have a Marvin Jones or Josh Reynolds. Or again, after week 7, you'll have JMO back. That's a lot of things for your defense to have to contend with, on top of the fact that you have an amazing offensive coordinator and Ben Johnson, who essentially you're giving him another weapon. You're giving him another tool to use to say, hey, make this defense even harder to defend. So that's where you start to look at DeAndre Hopkins and it's like, man, like that's do they need it? No. But would it make this team even more explosive offensively? Absolutely. And if that's the game, if the game is especially how the league is trending now, where it's really all about points, DeAndre Hopkins gives you more opportunities to get more points, whether it's him getting in the end zone himself or him at least getting you within striking distance. DeAndre Hopkins only played 9 games last year and still put up 717 yards. He still put up 3 touchdowns. He still had 11.2 yards per reception in only a 9 game sample size. In the year before that, he had less yardage, but again, played less games, didn't play a full season, had less yards, but still put up 8 touchdowns. Like he's still capable of doing those things. He's still like a bucket in terms of making contested catches, being able to get open on the outside. Um, I mean, whenever Hard Knocks comes around, right? The clip with DeAndre Hopkins going up against shoot, oh D'Angelo Hall, right? When he was with Washington, that little back and forth and how like D Hop cooked him to the point, like obviously wasn't trying to have him tear his ACL, but he cooked him so bad that the dude tore his ACL. Like that's how much of a technician DeAndre Hopkins is. And so when you think about the possibility of having that in a Ben Johnson offense with Jared Goff, quarterbacking your team, and you look at what this offense was a season ago, yeah, there's a lot of to like, and I can see why a lot of fans are saying like, "Yo, go get this guy." And so I at least will say, like, yeah, like you should. Like Brad Holmes should absolutely have been reaching out to D Hop's, agent or whoever and saying, like, hey, engaging his interest in Detroit. And if there is interest, then yeah, make an offer. I don't know what DeAndre Hopkins is going to be wanting because again, he just got released from a $22 million contract. I don't know how much of that, like, I don't know how much more guaranteed money he had. I don't know if he's still going to be getting paid by Arizona. I'll have to look into that after the show, or you guys can let me know in the comments if they still owe him money. But if that's the case, then maybe you're able to get him on something similar as you did with Chauncey Gardner Johnson, where it's like, hey, 1 year deal, come here, help us get to the Super Bowl, and then go cash out after that. Obviously, he'll be 32, so I don't know. Like I said, this is where things become tricky on DeAndre Hopkins side. On Detroit side, I think it's very simple as far as why you would want him. On D Hop side, it becomes very interesting and tricky because it's like, what exactly is he looking for? And I've shared, and I know I've seen other people share it too. When DeAndre Hopkins had his interview with the I Am Athlete podcast, and he listed off like quarterbacks he'd like to play with, and he also listed off things he's looking for in teams while Detroit, like Jared Goff wasn't listed among the quarterbacks he wants to work with, but Detroit does have a lot of the things that he's looking for as far as from a team standpoint. He has an offense and a quarterback that loves the game. He would have an offense and a quarterback that loves the game and that can distribute it to everybody. Uh, he would have competent management. Obviously, Brad Holmes has only been here for 3 years, but in the 3 years that Brad Holmes has been here, this team has gotten significantly better, both talent wise and in the records standings. And you have a head coach that, again, players love and people want to go to war for. So while that wasn't on his list, he would have that have that going for him. The third thing that was on his list was like having a really good defense or a strong defensive line. That's a little TBD. I'll admit that's TBD. But if you go strictly based off of how the Lions played the last 10 games, you could, definitely pitch that to DeAndre Hopkins and saying, hey, this defense is on the come up. This defense will be much better than they were to start the season the previous year. And we believe that they'll be better. Granted, the pieces we've added on the back end and at the linebacker position and some tweaks that we've made to the defensive line. So, but like I said, it then just comes down to okay, DeAndre Hopkins is 31 years old. Is he at this point of his career where he's doing things similar to like Von Miller or some of these other veterans where like, hey, he's just looking for 1 year deals and he's just going to take 1 year deals to hopefully get to a Super Bowl and he's just going to find the best team that's going to do that for him? Or is he looking for something still long term?